Welcome to Indigenous Earth, where we explore indigenous wisdom to help you protect and connect to our planet. From the Paitavdira tribe of Paraguay, I'm your host, Frank Oscar Weaver. Today we're going to take a journey to the heart of the Navajo Nation, where we meet Alastair Lee Bitsóí, a journalist, storyteller, and farmer who's cultivated more than just crops. From the pages of the Navajo Times to the halls of Columbia University, and now back to his ancestral lands. Alastair is going to share how a tiny ancient potato became an unexpected guide in his path towards healing and cultural preservation. In a region where 1 in 3 households lack access to clean drinking water, his story is going to weave ancient wisdom about water stewardship with the modern day challenges facing so many indigenous communities. Join us as we explore the intersection of indigenous wisdom with the modern challenges and the power of storytelling to preserve cultural heritage, and how sometimes the smallest seeds can yield the most profound transformations.
I'm 1200. I'm near the water people. I'm born for Kinyaani, which is like Towering House people. And my third clan is Ushtia, Red Streak Bottom people. And my fourth clan is Mud people, Hushkishni. And so I pride myself in being water clan because we're supposed to bring the moisture to the Navajo Nation, even among this 25-year-old drought that's happening. And so, like tapping into that knowledge system, like how as water clan, how do you bring that resources to your community from that spiritual realm is kind of where I'm at in my path. And I think that being a farmer allows me to tap into some of those knowledge systems that are untapped. I'm in a little community called Naschitti. It's on the New Mexico side of the Navajo Nation. It's probably like 50 minutes from the tribal capital in Window Rock, Arizona, nestled below the Chusca mountain range, which is a mountain range that runs along the Arizona and New Mexico state borderline.
That's awesome. It's a beautiful area. I was there earlier this year. I went to Window Rock with my friend Zuniba, and it's such a beautiful capital. You have the Capitol building overlooking Window Rock, and you have the monument there for the Cold Talkers. It's a beautiful area there.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful area. And speaking of Window Rock, I do currently work for Navajo Nation President Boo Nygren. So I see the Window Rock monument or the rock formation on the daily. And sometimes I'll take my walks from the office around the Veterans Memorial Park or the trails behind the Window Rock just to get a breather here and there. So yeah, it's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And congratulations in getting your master's in journalism. That's quite an achievement. What inspired you to study journalism?
Thank you, Frank, for the opportunity to be on your podcast today, your podcast video show. And yeah, I did graduate from Columbia Journalism School. In addition to that, I did study science journalism. And part of why I wanted to be in New York studying there was because it is a top-notch journalism school. It's known for its journalism. It's a reporting. Journalism is part of who I am. I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. More so, I think, essayist as well. And I have a lot of POV. I guess everyone has POVs, but I feel like mine are kind of strong and out there. So I do meddle between. So that's why I kind of say like I'm more a storyteller rather than a journalist or those other categories that exists when it comes to writing. And I chose science journalism or science reporting because what brings me to this podcast is the little potatoes and drought and climate, like mitigation, environmental justice topics, and just being a reporter. I did start at the Navajo Times in Window Rock, So a lot of my journalism started, or that birth of story or seeking the truth through storytelling started with the Navajo Times. And then I did other work in between. I did land at the Salt Lake Tribune as a reporter. I also landed some bylines with High Country News, so an environmental outlet. But even between those outlets, I did work in conservation as well. Specifically, under the Trump administration, we are going to welcome a new Trump administration. But during the first Trump admin, I was working with Bears Ears National Monument, and that's where I was introduced to the potatoes, and I did a lot of advocacy, land protection of ancestral lands in southern Utah that belonged to the people, my people, the Zuni, the Hopi, the Pueblos in New Mexico, as well as the Utes, the different bands of Utes, and a lot of Indigenous knowledge and a lot of Indigenous stewardship that now I've learned through that line of work that I'm now applying to my farmland here in Naschitti, and trying to also demonstrate and share that knowledge with community members, but also, I guess, the masses, if they're interested in what they call now Indigenous ecological knowledge or Indigenous wisdom or Indigenous thoughts. So that's kind of a nutshell of why I chose climate science reporting, and it meshes with my interest in public health topics. I did live in New York twice now, and so my first master's degree is a master's in public health. So I like that intersection of environment, land, public health, and story. And I guess farming is part of that. So those are my interests as a writer. Right now, working as a staff writer for President Nygren. He's considered the youngest Navajo Nation president to be ever elected, and he's on his second term. So I'm hired out of Columbia to help him. I was deciding to stay in New York. I want to still stay in New York, but upon graduation, I didn't really have a clear plan. And as you know, when you're a student, you're transitioning back to freelance or the workforce. And I did have a couple bylines over the summer. One focused with the Arizona Mirror on the legacy of uranium mining in the Navajo Nation. It's like a future story of a young scientist at Columbia who's doing uranium work. And then I had a byline that focused on the vulnerability of the heat index for New Yorkers for Inside Climate News. So those are kind of like the fresher bylines that I had over the summer before I took on this government role with President Nygren's administration. In this capacity, obviously, there's a lot of different things going on, including the president's ban on uranium across the Navajo Nation, and just, introducing different topics to his administration, or trying to also identify the topics that kind of align with Alastair's moral compass in a government role.
Well, what a journey you had so far with your storytelling. Great, amazing things that you have written about, that you have shared with the world. And it makes me wonder, was this something that pulled you to become a storyteller from an early age? Was it somebody that maybe kind of like you feel inspired by? Or was it hearing the stories? What pulled you to be like, hey, I want to share the path of a storyteller?
I tried to run away from it, and it pulls me back. So I think at going to Columbia, I kind of surrendered to it. I was like, okay, I'll surrender. Kind of like surrendering to love, if that makes sense. I was like, okay, I can't just run away from you. Like, this is my skill as a writer. And when I reflect on what inspired to be a storyteller or journalist, surrendered to this idea that you're a writer, that's your gift, that's your being, and what's gonna help change the world if you can. I mean, that's not my goal to change. I mean, I'll share an idea or concept through writing. And I realize it is a gift. I mean, it has given me opportunity, and it also has given me access to some of these resources culturally or like physically or mentally or spiritually, to share with the world. And I feel like I've always had interest in writing when I was young. When I think about it, I know one of my late aunties like put me on hooked on phonics when I was younger. I had to give credit to a public school teacher who kind of trained some of us in the classics of English. And I think that's where that craft or that interest of writing came from. But it wasn't until I got to college, though, that I realized, like, even though I was considered like top 5%, like in my class, when I transitioned off to like private college, then I realized my deficiencies, and I realized I started there in English 99, just never really. So that kind of gave some reconciliation, or like really like thinking about, well, is this what you want to do? And so I feel like some of that trauma of being in higher education kind of like derailed me. But then it wasn't until I started writing press releases. It's so interesting that I'm back in government. Like, I started my writing career professionally in government like over 10 years ago, basically. So I'm back where it started again. So it's interesting how things like spiral in and out. And I feel like that's also part of healing. I guess I'm on this path of healing historical traumas with myself, but also internal traumas with complex trauma, complex PTSD, and seeing those patterns of behavior in my being, but also identifying it among others in my community and my own family, but also systemically. Like, I recently won some writing awards on my coverage on boarding school trauma, and just like, how do you get an Indigenous elder of today to talk about their atrocities to help heal their families? And I say heal because I feel like, I know it's a buzzword, but I think that healing started like with my work with Bears Ears and just relationship with this potato that I now grow. And so, yeah, it's just a spiral. I don't know. It's messy. It's just like everything in between. Those are my answers to why I became a writer. I like story or journalism where there are like, I guess if I'm a storyteller, it would be a nonfiction storyteller, because I'm a journalist like as well. So like I like real story. I'm not gonna make up something out of my head. Like, where are the facts and let's tell it. And I think that's just how I am. Like, what are the facts? This is what it is. And like, what can you do with this evidence? How can you tell a story with this fact? I don't know if it's because of my journey where I've maybe been portrayed or been told different things. And then I see it in the historical period of history and science. And I'm like, oh, let's try to reclaim some of these stories, or let's fact check some of these things, or what's the other angle? What's the untold voices to this story? And yeah, I'm a storyteller. I've done many different projects in between since then. But I would say the last 3 years, or since being a grower of small foods, I feel like understanding that natural relationship with myself and the plants that I grow in the food, I feel like that's liberated me more, and to become more in tune with my gifts and with writing.
Yeah, it's a journey to get us to where we are. And I really like how you're talking about surrendering to the things that we have passion for. I feel like sometimes we have a higher calling to do something. And I know I have experienced that many times, where I want to accomplish something, but now maybe that dream is too far from me. So I'm going to try this thing instead. And then that door closes. So let me try this other thing. This door closes. And then after there's so many doors closed, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to go back to the original thing that I wanted to do all along. And when you decide to do that, things just flow and it's almost like you're being taken by the current of a river. And it's
Yeah.
just unbelievable how those things happen. And sometimes we have to hit our head many times to finally say, okay, I'm going to go with the cosmos. I'm going to go with the way the universe wants me to go. And when you make that decision, things just flow. So I really understand your story. And it was something that you wrote that really, I found it touching. You said,
Okay.
Mother Nature influences creativity in my writing. I think it's such a beautiful sentence. Can you tell me more about that? How nature influences your writing?
Yeah, and I wanted to also add that, like, I'm embedded in the culture, like reporting with the Navajo Times and all the reporting I've done with Indigenous sources and the advocacy I did. I feel like it really grounded me as well. So I would like to thank those sources and those elders that push me in this direction, because story is embedded in our culture, and like there's layers of it. For example, the net creation story, there's like the foundational, I don't know, lyrics or whatever, or the main graphs of the story, but when you explore each sentence, it just unravels more and more and more. And I feel like song, prayer, ceremonies, it's story. And it makes sense to me on that end. And that's what I'm grateful for, because through this journey up to now, I appreciate my Dene culture more, because I feel like I have a grounder understanding of it now. And, like it helps. And it's also counter to the whole world. And I think that's also another struggle. So I want to add that. But when it comes to, like, yeah, Mother Nature, it is like my elders, my father, my uncles often say, like, you have to respect the water, the elements of like what fire, earth, the air, water, wind. Yeah, like even the wind, as annoying as it gets around here, you need the wind because that's a good indicator of like moisture coming. Or even looking at the sun and the moon and that relationship, but also looking at the moon specifically as a farmer, like, oh, there's moisture coming if it's curved in a crescent, or, like, so those indicators, um, I've even like with animals, like I've developed those relationships now with those animals. Like I've had different wild experiences just growing food and identifying a new insect that I never knew existed, or like seeing the bees come around, or like the monarch butterfly or other butterflies and other insects that depend on an ecosystem, or even like a rabbit or a crow, which is annoying, like animal of a, what are they called, scavengers. And so, like, and then you appreciate those systems and how it all works to bring life to this earth that we now live in. And I wrote those sentences from those experiences where I've advocated for land, like, said land sacred, but I feel like in the past I did that, but then now I'm actually like, okay, demonstrating it, like walking the life is sacred or land is sacred component now. And I see, and those are those relationships with these animals that in the water, in the rain, the monsoons that come, and like, how do you like flow with those changing systems of nature? And so I wrote that line from just being a small producer of foods of corn and these Four Corners potatoes and some watermelons and some other foods that I do now grow, that I'm still trying to diversify. And I'm still a young farmer. I have it all together. I'm still growing and learning about each food system and where each food comes from and why they're brown in corn, not brown, blue in corn, or yellow or white or red, or different varieties. And so I I think I picked that up too, because it just made logical sense in my journey, but also I was around it. Like, it's dormant knowledge in our community, so it's also not anything new, but it's sadly new in this post-COVID-19 world. And so it's just kind of sad to see a lot of our people just not exercising that part of their brain. And they used to do that. And so there are movements in the community. And so I'm just one of many different producers of foods in our community that is happening right now.
Yeah, the Navajo Nation is very interesting because I read that there's what we call a food desert, that there's not a lot of produce. Another issue too is water access.
Yeah.
For most places in the United States, when we turn on the tap, water comes on. When we flush the toilet, the water washes. But that's not so
Yeah.
much in the Navajo Nation, to my understanding. And
Yeah.
that access to water, I mean, is a human right.
Right.
Water is very important. And I know that you have a scar like of avoiding water to drink. Can you tell me
Yeah.
more about what that lack of water in the on your area?
The latest data is like 1 in 3 Navajo households, or like 30% of Navajo households, do not have access to quality drinking water. When I grew up, we didn't have, I feel like I like to say it like this, like, we were culturally rich, but we weren't financially wealthy. My generation, millennials now, we're only the third generation to have like a connection with the American dollar. So it's still kind of new in our society, sadly. Um, there are some successful Native Americans and successful Navajos that do know how to work with money. I mean, so it's not to say that there's no richness here, or wealth being generated, but there is. But not everyone's on the same equitable page as far as like developing wealth. I didn't know that I didn't come from a financially wealthy family until I went to college. And I saw those socioeconomic differences as another layer to navigate when you're pursuing higher education. And I grew up, I'm also a proponent of mental health therapy among Indigenous communities, because I feel like I benefited from mental health access and therapy. And knowing and studying public health data, knowing that the episode of where the trauma of house tours still impacts me to this day, is one, public health data would say that's an example of unintentional injury. And unintentional injury is obviously a high burden of death in Native American communities. And then that was also a traumatic event in my life. And so I think just that water episode is very, I can talk about it now because I feel comfortable, but when I think about it, it was the dysfunction in my family that created that episode, to where this so-called discipline of like wash the dishes, clean up after yourself. But I was young, so I realized I was also, as an oldest child, I felt like I was also the experimental child, but also I was also forced to be a therapist for my mom and dad. When I talk about that episode of boiling hot water spilling on my left foot, it was because I was forced to do a chore that my mother or father should have done, but they didn't do it because they didn't have the mental capacity to understand that what they were assigning their child probably shouldn't have happened. But then it makes me realize like how messed up they were in their own childhoods. And so, like these behavioral patterns, I'm trying to eliminate them now that I have nieces and nephews. Now, like, how do you end those curses of dysfunction in Native communities? And you can trace it back to the systemic issues of boarding school and what my parents went through at boarding school, and how those so-called practices of discipline that they thought was normal was now facilitated upon their children now. And the children now, at least some of us, are standing up against that kind of a discipline, like where that's actual dysfunction, that's actual abuse. And so, like, as a reporter, as a storyteller, I just came through this path of seeing those behaviors in my community, and then just how it impacted me directly, and like how I was put in these situations that harm me, my heart, that harm my spirit. And like, and then you come out of it and you're like, that was wrong. Like, why did they do that to me? And so, like, I know a lot of outside world non-natives will see, like, why is there such high obesity rate in the communities, or why is there high suicide, or why is there excessive drunkenness? But they don't know some of them don't know, most of them don't know the systemic product that they're part of. So it's just recycling again some of the patriarchy, or most of the patriarchy that impacts us now, that some of us who are chosen to see these like atrocities in our communities and see these bad misnomers happening, like, I call it out now, and it creates friction in my community. It creates chaos in my own family. I'm like, these are the patterns of behavior. If you want to keep going down that path, keep going it. But like, here, I'm trying to stop it. And if I'm that vessel for change, I will be that vessel. But I don't want any more of my baby nieces or nephews to be harmed from the same harms that made my life difficult as it is, when it could have been easier and more efficient and more healthier. Because I've been to therapy and I've written about therapy. I'm a proponent of all Native Americans going to therapy.
That's very important, and I just want to say thank you so much for sharing. Very powerful. I know that is not easy, and thank you for being an advocate for mental health. This is something that I struggled with too before. I was living with PTSD and I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think, we were raised, at least the way that I was raised was, there was a saying that said, a man can only cry when he's drunk or when he's singing. Other times you couldn't show emotion. So there's a lot of things that we kind of grew up with that kind of make us harder and make us difficult. And you have to get to a point where you have to say, like, you know what, I need to ask for help. I need professional help, and being able to do that is really hard, because it's, you're opening the wound and putting your finger in the wound, but only by doing that and taking all the bad stuff there can that wound actually heal. So I thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm gonna put on the link descriptions some resources for people that are listening now that they can reach out to and seek help if they would like to do so.
I didn't know that I was one of 30% of households that didn't have access to water. I didn't know that I came from a background that didn't have all the resources, because I think in Native communities, like I said, you kind of improvise. You're like, oh, these are kind of like the stakes. This is what I have. Be appreciative of what I have, but make the best with what you have. And so with water access, I grew up without it. There was days we had water, some days we didn't. Some days I went to a toxic aunt's house to go shower, knowing that. And then, like, my episode getting burned with water, I was like, that shouldn't have happened. It did. That's when I realized that we need to figure out how to get water to other people. So in this role now with President Nygren's administration, he is advocating, along with the Navajo Nation Council, the legislative body, like, to settle Navajo water rights in the Four Corners region. Luckily for New Mexico, where I'm from, the previous presidents had negotiated water rights deals. And so that infrastructure now is coming to communities on the New Mexico side of the Navajo Nation. So I know some chapter communities are planning for water access. And so knowing that as a farmer, I'm like, okay, how can I access that? Like, how can I get that? Or if I'm gonna build a home here in the Navajo Nation, how do I establish a homestead with access to water and electricity? I'm learning on the ground with this role, like how that's all people want. And so they want basic water and basic power. And when it comes to water access, I see the importance of it. I know the importance of it. And luckily in my community, there's no legacy of uranium. So our water is pretty healthy. And it's we just live at the base of the mountains, and so we feel like we get really good mountain water, spring water. And the narrative in my community is that a badger dug into the ground in the local arroyo here and developed and found a spring, and so that's how my community was founded. And it's called a Naschitti, so it's like a badger clawing into the ground and finding water. I'm also water clan too.
Yeah, and at the moment you're using the water from the rain and from the
Yeah.
springs to water your crops. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I live luckily at the base of the Chiska mountain range. And so when I was starting my career as a farmer, I would haul water in my little hatchback, which no longer exists. But I was improvising. I didn't know like how disconnected I was to being a farmer, but it took a lot of improvising, and I would journey up to the mountains to get spring water to feed my plants. Or I got creative recently and I saw the flow of water when the monsoon comes, or even when the snow comes. So we do get snow here. And I decided to build a berm, whether it was illegal or not, in the cornfield that my late grandmother assigned me on behalf of my entire family. So there's that opportunity or burden if you look at it in either direction. And I was like, okay, this is again like the improvising, the creativity. Like, okay, if this is my cornfield, if it's named under my name, you have to make it active, or else it could be reassigned to a farmer, or it depends on the policies of what they call grazing officers in the community. And so some are not active, or some are, and some keep farmers, ranchers accountable. And so knowing accountability, and I value accountability, I was like, okay, well, this is this farm that I'm supposed to navigate and create, like, let's figure out ways to develop it. I just completed my third growing season and third year of where I created an earthen dam berm. And already I'm seeing changes in the cornfield from just the harvesting of monsoonal rainfall from the mountains. And obviously that leads into like Chaco Wash, and that's a tributary to the San Juan River and then to the Colorado River. So, I feel like as a farmer, I see those impacts or opportunities because I'm near the headwaters of the Chiska Mountain Range. And so like that water I want to use, I don't want it to go to Las Vegas or Los Angeles or Phoenix for development down there. So I'm in some ways politically standing up against that kind of a development, unsustainable development by water harvesting. Even though it's like little, it's not a lot. It is a lot, but it's not like a big dent to where I would stop development down that way. That's my political stance to water. And like I said, before I started farming up there, there was ravaged. There was like so many prairie dogs I couldn't even like plant. But through creating a water dam or harvesting system, they have since relocated. They would take the seeds that I would put into the ground, and I'm proud of that work because it's changing the farmland from being a producer of the foods like the potatoes and the corn, but also the different life insects or worms or little mushrooms that are starting to begin or emerge, but also like the sunflowers that are coming out wildly again that I never saw um, when I was a child, but also the um, tea, the Navajo tea or Indian tea or the green thread that naturally grows around here came back. So that was a sign that I saw or an indicator that I was like, oh, this water harvesting, it's a lot of water. It's not a lot. Doesn't mean it's not going to stop development in those other cities, but it's like exercising my political right for access to water. So, like that was more of a creative thought. Like, this is how water flows here. Let's kind of control the water flow and let's kind of use it to our advantage. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Yes, and you're growing the four corner potato, and we've been talking so much. I mean, you've been talking so much about the four corner potato that I almost feel like it's the third person in this conversation. So, with that in mind, would you like to introduce the four corner potato to us?
Yeah, so I'm going to share a little bit of the harvest I had this past year for the viewers. Here's what it looks like. I don't know if you can see.
A little bit. There you go.
I had to put it there. Cute and tiny and earthy. And they're like considered a first food to Indigenous people in the Four Corners region. And, I'm proud to grow it because I didn't ask for it. It was a gift from the former work I did with the advocacy with the story around Bears Ears National Monument in southern Utah. And so I want to thank my clan sister, Cynthia Wilson. I don't know if she'll see this video, but she's the person that gifted this like potato, like, here, this is what you're gonna grow. And I've been trying to be the best steward of this plant, of this food source since I've had it. And I feel like it's a food source that is helping me ground as a person, but also help people as well by being, I guess, walking the talk and not just say like, yeah, I'm a farmer or land sacred or, like, oh, that food's good, but actually producing it. And so I feel like that's my accountability to this potato that has been more or less a life savior for me. Because I don't know that if I didn't have this connection with it, I don't know that I would be doing this work to this day. And even in New York, like while I wanted to stay there in that capitalistic society, I would have lucid dreams of like my farm, of like being flooded. And, we got those floods this summer. That's what I was journaling the other day, like over the summer. Like, I don't know why these dreams come up. I don't know if it's because I'm always thinking about the farm and it's just in my unconscious thought process. But, I had lucid dreams of it flooding and it being lush and green. And I just took that as a sign like, okay, New York, I have to leave. And this past season, I did plant late, but I was able to plant before the first frost. So I did meet the deadline, but I know that I can plant at the very latest in July. But I left the potatoes in the ground and some of them have grown. They're growing on their own. And one of the scientists that I got to know, Bruce Pavlik, and his wife Lisbeth, they're the ones who've inspired or reintroduced this food into Indigenous nutritional sciences, but also into the palates of Indigenous people of the Southwest. And so I want to thank them too for giving me this opportunity to grow this food that not a lot of people know about. They don't know that it's more healthier than the potato in the grocery store, and that it's considered a superfood, and it grows naturally here in the environment. And I did my graduate master's thesis from Columbia. I wrote about this potato. I wrote about like the cultural narratives of turkey, wild turkey as the seed carrier from the underworlds that brought food for humankind to grow in this glittering world that we live in. And so my master thesis explores this potato and my relationship with it in story form, but also in my research for that story on potatoes, I learned this region is a potato region. I was trying to investigate a corporate agricultural farm in the Four Corners region. That's still a project that I still want to carry out, but I learned through researchers from there that this New Mexico or the Four Corners San Juan Basin is a natural potato habitat. So then that made more connection. I was like, okay, this makes sense why this potato that I now grow, which is indigenous to the region, is growing on its own. And some of them are growing naturally because I'm dispersing them naturally. I didn't know that. There's a population that I'm proud of, and they're the biggest ones here, like this one. And from my relationship with them, I became a dispersal agent. I didn't plant them. They just grew on their own. And I thought that, to me, that was a miracle. I was like, I didn't do that. But because their populations are growing separately. And I was just amazed that last summer, I was like, where is this coming from? And so it could have been a dormant potato for all these years, or I dispersed it naturally, not knowing or unknowingly. And so I'm learning a lot about this potato as a food. And through Cynthia, who has a dear friend, sister, and she's like, this is how you work with it. Like, so she said, get some clay, glace from a mineral soil, and then mix it with the clay to boil to reduce the alkaline in there. And then after that, eat it. And so I'm learning like how to cook it. I'm not a good cook, but I will like to grow the food to be cooked. That's where my passion is. And I'm getting started, like, and so I really credit this potato for putting me in the direction that I need it to go. And that relates to food advocacy. I'm a proponent of health and mental health. And of course, I like to write about it. So I'll have a few pieces about this potato. I think 2 pieces that I'm sitting on that I will get to write about.
That's beautiful. And there's so many things that makes me think about what you just shared and about being a dispenser of the potato. I've been reading lately about the leaf cutter ants in South America, that they cut the leaves. And I always saw them when I was growing up in Paraguay. You see all the ants line up, taking the leaves into the underground. And I thought that they were going to eat it, but actually they take it underground to grow fungus on that plant base. And that fungus only grows by the ants. So in a way, the ants domesticated the fungus, and the fungus domesticated the ants. So it's kind of interesting how that came about, and it kind of makes me think about you being dispensing the potato. It's always like, am I being the one seeding the potato, or the potato is seeding me too? It's always nature always had a circular back. And I was recently in Minneapolis, where I went to Indigenous Food Lab, where they have a project to bring indigenous food across tribal communities in the whole country, and it's very inspiring. And it really makes me think about the project you're doing about bringing the food that is grown in the region, that is high nutrients, to the people around it. And that makes me think that, a lot of people say that food is medicine. And just by hearing what you're saying about this potato makes me even more a believer in that.
Yeah, and adding science, which is my interest, it was a genetic study that was recently published from some of the sources I did talk to, like Bruce Pavlik and his wife Lisbeth Lauder, and from the University of Utah, that found the genetics trade of the path of the potato and the domestication of it. So then that's more evidence that the potato is naturally grown in the region, but it was also domesticated the way I just demonstrated from our ancestors from this region in central New Mexico and central Arizona around the Mogollon Rim area, and how it naturally goes there, and how it dispersed up into ancestral Puebloan sites like Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde, or even the ancestral sites in Bears Ears. And so that was more evidence that came out that further validated. But, as Indigenous people, we already we know this. And so it was interesting from the scientific world that they're tracing the domestication of it and where it came from, because there is theories like, where did it come from? Why is it here? And was it just grown at archaeological sites? But this study says no, there's also populations that are at non-archaeological sites. And so having that relationship with this potato and then that ancestral knowledge, but also the scientific knowledge and the climate knowledge, it's just it's inspiring and rewarding work to do. I don't call it work, it's just, I don't know, fun.
That's beautiful. And your work spans so many different areas. Work on water access, farming, mental health, native in higher education. I mean, there's so many different aspects of your work. And listening to this podcast, how do you think it is the one thing they can do to support the work that you're doing, or those communities that you're in touch with?
I feel like the audience should consider, like, Indigenous knowledge systems is real and alive still to this day, in that I'm just one of many sources in the community that is trying the best to live according to the values and the culture that I come from, or wherever they come from. And that we have scientists, communicators, writers, storytellers, healers, medicine people, scientists, like accountants, lawyers, business people in our communities. And some of them lead from this nature-based culture that we come from. And that if you're going to support me, I don't have a GoFundMe, I don't have anything like that going on, but just, I guess, send your good energy, your healthy energy to me, so that I can further develop my farm, that I can further amplify Indigenous voices and knowledge systems through the globe, and just keeping alive these things. Because I do this for now that I have baby nieces and nephews, like, I think of them when I do this. I think of the food, like, this is the future food that they'll have that I didn't have access to. Like with the potato, for instance, I've introduced that food to their palates so that I want them to live long lives. Like our culture says 102 years old is the lifespan. So, our people still live to that age. But with this influence of globalization, but also Americanization, our foods like this they're being put onto the side for a Big Mac or Chick-fil-A or Chipotle burrito, you know what I mean? But those foods they're artificial to the foods that we grow, and we grow them healthy and wholesome, and through, I guess, tears and blood and sweat. And so I just want the people to know that as Indigenous people or Diné people, some of us are still doing this work, and we're an AI technology world now. And so, like, we're still keeping these natural order of things, of how they grow, and it's still alive here. And so, and do your best as humans to stay connected to nature and advocate for her. So that's my PSA.
Yeah, those are beautiful words, and it kind of makes me ask you something else.
Sure.
Does the Four Corner Potato has an Instagram yet?
Oh no, it doesn't. It should have its own POV or Instagram, but there are some followers. Like, you can follow me. I kind of purge my Instagram, but I like to post stories on it. You can reach me at Alastair Bitsóí on Instagram. There's Cynthia Wilson. Maybe if you Google her. But there's growing, exciting research going on out there onto potato, the spuds, and yeah, there's different tribal stories or Indigenous stories about it. And so I'm more so interested in the Navajo connection to it. what it means for me and my story, but also just culturally, like what it means for the broader tribes of the region. And so um, it's exciting times, and I'm just doing my best to cultivate it. I'm just trying to learn and develop that connection with this beautiful food source.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I had a great conversation. I learned so much with you. So many facets, there's so many different ways that you are viewing, experiencing the world. So I want to say thank you again. I really appreciate it.
No, just thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing this audio podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have a few minutes, I'll be happy to hear what you have to say about our podcast and how we can make it better for you. Please take the short survey in the show description and have questions about our show lengths, the type of episodes. Your feedback will really help us improve our show. Thank you so much again. Stay connected to the earth. Agudje.